Ação dos representantes do MEC, Ministério da Saúde, Ministério do Desenvolvimento Social, Ministério do Desenvolvimento de Direitos Humanos e todas as secretarias estaduais e municipais que estão aqui representadas. Eu vou agora passar a palavra para a Ivânia, que vai fazer todas as orientações em relação aos trabalhos do dia. Muito obrigada.
Bom dia, a gente queria ter começado na hora, mas a chuva não deixou. Quero agradecer a todas as pessoas que estão aqui de outros estados também. E nosso objetivo hoje é trazer contribuições científicas para os processos de implementação previstos no marco legal. Nós temos o foco no Criança Feliz, mas também a abordagem pode dar luz para outros programas de larga escala. Nós temos a honra de ter a doutora Lauren Hogan, que fez o doutorado dela na Universidade da Austrália, Queensland University, e vamos ter participação por videoconferência da doutora Karen Turner, que foi orientadora dela e coautora do Programa de Parentalidade Positiva, o Triple P. Ela vai apresentar um pouco, então é um caso para a gente entender a implementação, como eles realizaram. Vamos ter também na oficina a contribuição da implementação do Programa Bolsa Família e do Programa Criança Feliz, para a gente estar somando, trocando experiências e aproveitando essa contribuição teórico-científica para os trabalhos que a gente está construindo junto. A oficina pode ser interativa, a Lauren pode receber perguntas durante a apresentação para a gente ir otimizando o tempo. E depois, como o tempo assim não vai ser suficiente, a gente pode deixar questões endereçadas, tentar ter alguma reunião na parte da tarde e uma continuidade no seminário internacional amanhã, onde vai ter a próxima conferência. Eu vou passar a palavra para a Lauren para ela fazer uma autoapresentação e depois também a professora Karen faz uma autoapresentação.
Hello. So I'll be presenting today on an introduction to implementation science. I'm not quite sure what introduction I was given by Ivania. I'm sure it was a great introduction, but I might just quickly mention a little bit about myself and how I came to be studying, researching, and working with implementation science. Basically, I started in kind of school psychology 12 years ago as looking at how children were coping that were living in poverty and supporting them to improve their English and math and health really all over. And I noticed that it would be really difficult to impact on the child without having the parent involved. So that in itself got me looking at parent and child interactions and parenting programs. And that actually brought me to Australia. I'm originally from South Carolina. And that's where I, for about 7 years, evaluated on different projects, starting as a research assistant to completing my PhD evaluating the Triple P Positive Parenting Program. And what I noticed both in the school psychology programs and in the parenting programs that a lot of times it was difficult to engage practitioners or workers to deliver programs and to implement, essentially, and then to implement with fidelity as well. So that is what got me to start looking at implementation science, and I completed my PhD research looking at the implementation of Triple P with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families in Australia. And so that has kind of opened up a world of implementation science for me with vulnerable communities. So that's what brought me here today. And I appreciate you guys having me here. So just to get started, implementation is the planned and intentional use of strategies to put into practice evidence-informed programs within real-world settings. So I think that first sentence really says, or that first part of the sentence really says a lot, in that they are very, very much intentional and planned strategies that we want to be using when implementing programs on a large scale. So this is kind of the formula for positive outcomes, effective program outcomes. And what we know is that you want to have effective interventions plus effective implementation and an enabling context, and that will then produce the positive outcomes. Within that, there are a number of different variables that we want to consider and a number of different strategies to get to that point. So that's what we will go through today. You will see this equation a few times as we go through each of the components. So better implementation does actually equal better outcomes. There have been a number of studies of one systematic review that actually shows, from looking at 500 different implementation studies, that effects were 2 to 3 times larger for programs that were implemented well. And there's a recent meta-analysis of 156 studies of 9 different home visiting programs that show that the program implementation quality can significantly impact on the outcomes that are achieved with families. And that study is specifically looking at the outcomes, the effectiveness of improving child maltreatment outcomes. All right, so high quality implementation. How do we get there? It first requires a collaboration and joint responsibility of multiple stakeholders, and that's including anyone from funders to policymakers, researchers, program developers, and the local organizations, the people who are working on the ground, especially to make sure that it's fitting within the context in which they're working, and local administrators. So it really does require, from the very beginning, an effective strategy to bring together all of those people to have effective implementation. Now, we know that widespread sustained implementation has been quite difficult to achieve. In a systematic review that I did, I found that out of 21 studies, about 43% were sustained after 3 years from the point of implementation. So that's not a large number, but I guess that's also not too bad. And we have a lot of work we can do, I guess, in this area. But what is implemented, we know, often disappears with staff turnover and just with time, and it can be staff from the ground workers to managers to a program champion who has been pushing the program forward. And effective interventions require far more than just choosing an effective program to use. That's a great first step, but then you have to kind of take the next step after that. So we know that these things are good to do all together, but alone, these things will not work. So identifying evidence-based practices and programs on itself will not work. Making laws and policy directives, which I know is an important thing that here in Brazil. So providing funding, one-way dissemination of information, similar to this workshop today, won't alone improve outcomes. Not providing, so when you're providing support, without expecting to have to change functions within the system. So the whole system needs to change. When you're thinking of implementing a new program, there will be, it might not be every piece of the system for every organization, but a number of systems will need to change. And also training alone will not improve outcomes. You need more than just training, which we'll talk about that in a little bit. So if you just do one of those things, children and families cannot benefit from something they do not get. And if they are not benefiting, then we're not meeting the outcomes that we are hoping to achieve as a whole. This study shows this is a program that was implemented recently, and only 9% of those who completed training, which was a 2-day workshop, followed through to implementation. So you can see the amount of funding that would have been spent to get that number of people trained, that number of people actually to the training spot, and then only 9% implementing. That's what we hope to change. One of the things we hope to change with implementation science. So as we're going through the different strategies today, I would just like for each of you to take a moment to think about where are there opportunities that you can use this within your work, or to address the different factors that we'll talk through. What are the benefits to addressing these different pieces of implementation science? And what are some possible challenges that you could also face? So if you just kind of reflect on that as you're going through today, that might also help you with directing your questions afterwards about the different challenges you have or might perceive having to trying these different strategies. So I'm starting with looking at readiness, which is a really important part of the implementation science piece. When you're first delivering a program, or first implementing, I should say, a program, I guess the first thing that you want to do for the sake of the organization and for the sake of the structure, for understanding the structure, is to understand the extent to which the organization and the members within the organization are ready, basically, to take on a new program. So you want to know the extent to which they're psychologically and behaviorally prepared to take on a new to take on a new program. And that could be a number of things, which we'll kind of go through a bit of a number of questions that help you determine readiness. But the problem is that we don't have a lot of valid and reliable measures that actually are measuring organizational readiness at the moment. We do have a few though, so we'll talk a bit about that. Effective interventions is the first piece of this puzzle. And we want to have usable interventions. So when we go into looking for the right programs to implement, the effective programs, some indicators of an effective program is to look at, does it have a clear description? Is there a description and a type of manual, at least, that tells you how to do each of the core strategies within the program? It doesn't have to be a full manual, but some type of practice profile so that you know how to, or the ground workers know how to implement. Also, clear essential functions that define the program are really important. So that's, again, a part of those strategies. Is it very clear about what you essentially have to do in order to implement that program? Also, the operational definitions of the essential functions. So you want to make sure that those essential functions are then defined. and practical performance assessments. So that can be looking at the number of different requirements for delivering the program for a practitioner who is on the ground. So that can be used by looking at an adherence checklist or fidelity assessment, which basically outlines the steps that are required to get to the end goal of that program. So it's basically making sure that you know that this program is teachable, learnable, and doable, and that those elements will be able to be achieved across the board for all organizations that we're working with. Okay, so I'll go into more detail about effective implementation and enabling context, because I know that, well, I wanted to highlight the usable interventions piece because it is very important to pick and choose programs that are based on evidence and that are usable. So I didn't want to leave that out, but we will go into more detail now for the effective implementation. Okay, so first, what steps do we take to implement a new program? This is a diagram that kind of consolidates a number of different implementation frameworks. There are a lot of implementation frameworks that are out there, but this is really kind of based on the NERN framework. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with that. It's the National the National Center for Implementation Research. And that, they have a number of resources that are really useful. And basically, this will take you through the steps that are required. So if we're looking at the exploration phase, you really want to do a needs assessment to make sure that as a program implementer or a purveyor, it might be, that you understand the needs, that you understand the needs of the community or of the people that you hope to serve. And that could be done in a number of ways. It can be done by actually doing a needs proper survey assessment of the community, of a sample of a community, or it can be looking at data that's already existing within an organization and determining who are our clients, who are the parents or the families or the children that we're seeing, what are their age groups, what are they generally being referred for, or what are they generally needing. So you can do that in those two ways. You don't necessarily have to do a survey needs assessment, but it can be useful to do that if you don't have existing organizational data. The next step is looking at examining the fit and feasibility of the intervention. And so there might also be times where you don't necessarily have to go into as much detail with each of these stages. If you feel like one area is doing really well, then you might not need to go in and do the entire fit and feasibility assessment. And then in this phase, it's also very important to involve stakeholders in decision making so that they are a part of the process. And that is the ground workers, managers, even definitely government officials. So anyone that is going to have a say in the implementation or the program that you're choosing in that exploration process. And you really want to get an understanding also what they want to get out of this program delivery. Okay, so then we have installation is the next phase. Let me see if this, that works. Okay. So installation, this is where you want to look at the resources to make sure that the organizations you've chosen the program, the organizations who are implementing, you want to make sure they have what they need to get the job done, to do that program. So it's getting the resources to them or building their capacity to acquire the resources on their own. And this is when you're also planning for training. And so that can look differently in a number of different settings. But the general idea is that you're putting your implementation supports in place and that you're addressing any needs that you see could potentially come up after program implementation. And then we have initial implementation. So in between these two phases, you would have had training. The training happens, and then you're initiating the program delivery. It might be the service delivery in whatever context, I guess, you're working. That's how you then get started. And this is the most crucial phase of this entire implementation strategy, because you have to make sure that the ground workers who are delivering the program are really supported and really feeling like it's okay to fail, to try again, to learn from their mistakes, essentially, because it's a rough time where there's a lot of pressure and you want to get it right because there's a lot weighing on this training and everybody implementing the program. But I think what is needed is a realization and kind of a reality check in a way to know that things aren't going to happen perfectly the first time or the second time, really. You have to be open to learning and going through cycles of learning. That is the key to this whole system working, really. So how to do that? Is you want to use data to improve that process. So when you think about evaluating programs, we oftentimes think about effectiveness or efficacy evaluations. Big randomized controlled trials or ways of proving that a program is effective. What you would do with this model is first, you're measuring and you're monitoring and measuring how things are going within the organization, within the community, within the context of which the practitioner is delivering, and also monitoring how they're delivering. So monitoring how that's going. So it's a continuous quality improvement process. And that's really going to be the other crucial part of this learning cycle, because you want to make sure that that practitioners are learning from everything that they're doing and using every opportunity that they can to improve on their practice. This oftentimes will also drive decision making, and we will go through that process within one of the next boxes. So there's a lot of problem solving happening in that phase. When we move into full implementation, at that point, the practice is really solidified and people are delivering, and you're now ready to start assessing. If you want to, or if you need to, then you're ready to start assessing effectiveness of the program and program outcomes in that sense. Because you wouldn't want to start assessing program outcomes when the program is not being delivered at where it's designed to be delivered. You'll have fidelity checks when you're doing the implementation outcome evaluation here in the initial implementation. So you really want to be waiting until full implementation because you know now that people are delivering as best as they can, and you're still learning. You're still going to be going through those processes of learning, but it's important to give it that time. At this point, then yes, so that's where the client outcomes are measurable, and you still are focusing on implementation and improving implementation. So this is an example of the. I'll go back really quick to. This is an example of exploration. This is a organizational readiness assessment. This is a formula for looking at if an organization is ready to start implementing. And this could be a organization within a community, or it can also be looking at individuals within a community. Maybe if there's not a full functioning organization in one community, you could still use this on an individual level. So it's R equals MC squared, and that's really saying that what you need is motivation, and that's the motivation of the stakeholders to deliver the program. They gain that motivation through thinking or knowing or thinking, perceiving that there are advantages of using the program over and above something that they were already doing. If they were already doing something with families and they now need to change that, and it's very important that they see an advantage to changing that, or else it's extra energy exerted, and for what reason is what they would be thinking. Compatibility and complexity, trialability, all of these words are basically looking at the program. Can you use it? Can you trial it? That's a big factor for motivation. Can you observe somebody else doing it? And can you observe the benefits of a family or a child after using it? Can you actually see those outcomes? That's more likely to enhance motivation. And is it a priority for your workplace and for yourself? Is it a priority issue? So then looking at, the first C is general capacity. So it's the general organizational capacity to deliver a program. And that's looking at the resources and those things. And then there's program-specific capacity. And that is looking at the actual knowledge and the skills and the pieces of that usable program or that usable intervention to make sure that staff can actually acquire those skills and what is needed to get them there. I tried to include all the references at the bottom of each of the slides in case you would like to look into these further or get some background information for yourself. So I just wanted to mention that. Now, these are the questions that you'd want to be asking in the organizational readiness piece. And this is really, when you're looking at the exploration phase of the 4 stages, this is where you're looking at specific readiness questions. So why is it, and this can be individual or site specific. So why is your site interested in implementing whatever program? What are the barriers to implementing that program? What can you perceive as a barrier? This support. What support is it that your organization will need to build capacity to get to the point where they can deliver? What funding is needed? Are there referrals there? Will parents or children be able to access that service? And using systems. So is there a data system that's used Or is there another type of system that's used in order to collect information? And is it going to have to change? Are you going to have to change that data system to be prepared to take on the program? Usually that answer is yes. So organizational readiness for implementation change is one of the individual measures that has recently it was developed in 2014, but they also have done the psychometric properties for that measure. So they looked at and validated this scale to be used in a way where an individual, you can ask an individual a question on the individual level, or you can ask them a question on the organizational level, and it would still provide valid results. Okay, so how do we build capacity to support implementation of new programs? Okay, there we go. So these are has anybody seen this diagram before? The implementation drivers diagram? No? Okay, so it looks kind of complex, but it is, I guess, in some ways. This is what is required you want all of these drivers to be functioning at capacity in order to have effective implementation. That being said, if you have strong coaching, and maybe when you went through this selection process for recruiting people to deliver the program, maybe you weren't able to recruit the people with the right level of education, if that's something that's required for the program. That can be compensated for with the right coaching and the right training. And when I say the right training, there is specific qualities that we would want to look for to know that the training is going to be effective. But if something is out of balance, it can be compensated for with one of the other areas, which is usually needed. So I might just go through so that we know what the different drivers are. We have coaching at the top, which we'll talk about as an example of one of these drivers. Training, staff selection, which is just what I was mentioning about recruiting the right staff who either have the right skills or the right skills to be able to be trained in the program. You will go kind of over here, systems intervention. For the organizational drivers, it's really important to have the right infrastructure in place so that things run smoothly. That can be anything from the administration to collect data, or the data systems that you need to use, or the quality improvement process that is also required to make this work. So we have, I just mentioned the data systems, we have the administrative type support, so that's is somebody available to, if there are resources needed, is somebody available to get those resources and gather those resources? Sometimes that's not possible, which is okay, because then that can be compensated with staff selection, selecting a staff member who's able to compensate and to juggle those things, juggle getting ready for whatever they're delivering or whatever programs they're using when they don't have administrative support. And then there's systems intervention, so that's the other kind of infrastructure that's required within the organization, of looking at the leadership interaction with staff, all the way to, I guess, workplace climate and culture. So that is where you have a climate and a workplace, where everybody is feeling supported, and team leaders are inspiring staff to take on and learn from taking on the new program. Okay, so then we have leadership, which is either technical or adaptive, and that's leadership that's handling ground level functioning. So that can be making sure that there is funding available at the organization level to get the resources that are needed, all the way to organizing a training room for training. So those are kind of quite different areas of leadership that are required to make sure this is all functioning. These things can all be included in a performance assessment. And that performance assessment can help the organization improve on how they are functioning and working on these different drivers, and then look at where things needed to improve. That then impacts, as I was saying at the beginning, this is with the effective implementation, you then have effective program outcomes. Okay, so when we're thinking about coaching and general implementation, the full implementation of evidence-based programs or evidence-informed programs requires behavior change, not just at the worker level, but also at the organizational level. This could be supervisors, managers, agency support that will also have to change how they're functioning to make room and make a hospitable environment for the program to function in. And this can essentially be facilitated through the organizational readiness assessments, through the quality improvement processes. So that can be changed through time. It's okay if you're starting out and not everybody is ready and have already changed. This brings you through that process of change. The implementation framework does. Okay, so the quality assurance mechanism is that coaching. When you're looking at the triangle, coaching was kind of up in this area, or maybe it was up in this area. But coaching is an important piece that I want to talk about because I think it's probably something that we don't usually consider. And so and on a number of different levels, it improves functioning for the organization, for all the other drivers that are in the triangle. So coaching is designed to develop and maintain practitioner competency and adherence. And it's usually on the job. And this can happen through a supervisor, or it can happen through, at the beginning, through somebody outside of the organization coming in to just do the coaching role. But essentially, you want the supervisor to have the skills to eventually be able to take on the coaching themselves. So if everyone's learning a new program at the same time, you might not have the chance to train supervisors first so that they can be a coach. And you might need to you need an expert that can provide the coaching support because in my experience, if you go out into the field and train staff to deliver a program and they are all new, including managers, even if the managers are completely on board, it's really hard for them to get going because they don't have an expert at their organization who understands and knows that program and knows the ins and outs of how to deliver it. So that's just probably a piece of information that I've come across over the few years of looking at these coaching models. So all coaching activities have a clear focus and it should be directly relevant. When I was describing the usable intervention and how you need to explicitly state what it is that this program is doing, make sure that it's teachable, learnable, and doable. That is used to then help develop a coaching fidelity plan so that you know what to look for. So supervisors then can say, okay, this is what I want my ground worker to be doing, and it gives you a point of reference as a supervisor or a manager to then go back and provide feedback to your worker. And for practitioners in the field who are receiving that feedback, it is very effective to have somebody providing both areas that are going well. Because if you think about any time you tried something new and you really want to do well, but you have no clue because you've never done this before. Anytime any person, human being, receives that feedback on both things that they're doing well and things that they need to work on, constructive feedback, that then enhances their motivation and their desire to do better and to work to improve, I should say, on their program delivery of whatever that might be. So coaches should generally utilize a number of different ways of evaluating how things are going for the people who are using the program. They can usually do that through, there's sometimes development plans that are made, but what I would really first start with is a fidelity assessment or an adherence assessment. Has anybody used a fidelity assessment or an adherence assessment? Does anybody know what that is? Is that? No, okay. So I just wanted to make sure so I didn't pass it over without somebody knowing. It doesn't. Okay, so basically, it really does just outline. I created a fidelity assessment 2 weeks ago for motivational interviewing, for a very brief version of motivational interviewing training. Essentially, what you would do is look at the core components that would be in your usable intervention manual or whatever it is that you have looked up to find what it is that this program is all about. You would take the core skills that need to be used and put them into a checklist. It's usually good if you have a Likert scale on 1 to 5 scale to determine how a staff member is doing and how they and where they can improve. So the 1 might mean that they have a lot of work to do, and a 5 might mean that they have aced this area and they have no longer need to focus on that at the moment. But there are times where staff might need to come back and learn a new skill. Relearn, a new skill. So definitely, I think that looking at an adherence checklist is a great start to assessing how things are going and developing an adherence checklist. I generally also recommend that with those fidelity checklists, if you have a Likert scale, on a scale of 1 to 5, that you would start in the middle at 3 always, assuming that a staff member has at least the average amount of skills required after training to undertake a certain program delivery. And then if they are below average, you would provide a reason for that, and if they're above average, you would provide a reason for that. But you would want to see some fluctuation from that point, but just always going and assuming that the staff member is able to at least have that average level of skill. So why field observations? Because I was saying that this should be done on the job. That is a really useful, not useful, but a most necessary technique if possible. When I say if possible, I mean that a lot of times, or sometimes, a supervisor wouldn't be able to go out. The workload is too much, so they can't go out with their ground worker. And so they would need to practice in the office or in whatever environment they're in. They would practice before this person goes to maybe a home visit, or before they run a one-on-one session with a family, or before they run a group. And that is still an effective strategy. It's better to be able to, if a supervisor can observe their they can observe the ground worker, because they can then provide very specific feedback, and that's the best type of feedback, is specific about what you're doing in your day-to-day practice. So essentially, the coaches observe practitioners in the delivery of practice, which is what we were saying. They assess the skill level using, hopefully, a Likert scale. They might not do that right there in front. They hopefully wouldn't do that right there in front of the practitioner, but they would take those scores once they got back to the office, and they would be noting in their mind things that are going well and things that they can improve on. And then they provide immediate feedback. So as soon as you get back to wherever it is that you're working, or as soon as you leave the family's home or the group that you're running, you give feedback on the spot so that the practitioner can then immediately transfer what they're learning and improve on that by picking out ways they themselves think that they could improve on that first. And then the next would be having the supervisor either reiterate what they've said and say, yes, that is what we want to improve on, or even choosing more things to work towards. This contributes to the whole cycle of ongoing monitoring and evaluation. So let's keep this one in mind, and we'll come back to this in just a minute about providing feedback and how that works within the cycle of improvement. Okay. So if you want to just take a moment to think about, as I was saying at the beginning, with these strategies so far that we've talked about, are there opportunities where you could address this, or your team could address this, or do you see what the benefits could be, or any challenges? You can just write it down on your paper just as a note, because as someone who works in implementation, I know that you oftentimes have an overload of information from days like this. So if you process it as we go, it's more likely that you'll be able to use these skills or put this information, I should say, into practice. So I'll just give you a minute to think about that. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the final box, which is the enabling context, which is probably one of my favorite areas of implementation because we talked about data and monitoring, and as a researcher, that just so happens to be the area that I enjoy the most. But I will not talk too much about this because I know that's not the same for everybody else. So, how do we manage the process for implementing the new program? The one two-word answer to that is implementation teams. They are oftentimes, and it's best when implementation teams sit at the central level, or the national level, I should say, the local level, and the practice level. The local level could be the municipality level or at the state level. But probably I would see that the states would be functioning at the top national implementation team. And then you have the practice level, which are the workers and organizations. And these teams are really, the function of them are about making sure that they are selecting the right programs, the usable, doable, learnable programs, that they are also holding whoever it might be within the organizations accountable to delivering the program on the ground. And this, it will then impact on the level of sustainability, usually, of the program. So they, as I was saying, they select and tailor the program, they ensure fidelity assessments are completed and used, they ensure implementation resources and supports are in place, and they do the collecting and monitoring and using of the data within those feedback cycles. This data is what is used to look at the implementation outcomes and later the program outcomes. Once you know you're implementing properly, then it's also a part of that feedback process to ensure that you're achieving the program outcomes, the program effectiveness outcomes. You also, they build cross-sector collaborations to ensure referral sources, to ensure that everything is functioning as needed, and that service partners are aligning with this new way of doing things, this new way of working. So this is kind of the essence of how things get done, I should say. So, how do we ensure the new program is working, remove barriers, and continually make it better? This would be what you've heard me mention with the continuous quality improvement process. But the essence of that is that it's key to have communication at all of these levels that I mentioned, and also to have a plan for data collection. So we can't hope it into happening. There has to be a real system around what are we looking at this point. And that can be guided by those implementation stages that were in the earlier slide, where at the beginning you'd be looking at a needs assessment and you'd be discussing the needs assessment. And then later, before that, you would do an organizational readiness assessment. And then you would go on to do the fidelity checks. So this team would actually meet, or these teams, I should say, would meet to discuss that data. And then the discussion would really be about what is working and what's not working. that's what we essentially want to get to in those discussions. And when we're collecting data on implementation outcomes, it can be a number of things, as I was saying. So I have feasibility in here, fidelity, acceptability, and also costs. So oftentimes you do a cost effectiveness analysis. I know, actually that's probably something that Karen would be able to mention, because I know that Triple P does a cost effectiveness analysis, but even at the organizational level, doing a cost analysis on how much is this actually costing us to deliver the program. And you can add in a number of other types of cost analysis in that. And then the sustainability as well. Those are different outcomes that you can focus on during your implementation team meetings. And this is the process. And there's a number of different models that you can use to think about continuous quality improvement, but one of the most well-known is the Deming model, or the plan, do, study, act cycle. So it starts here with planning what intervention you're going to do, or what change you're going to make. If you're already in this cycle, you already have a program, you can plan based on the data that you collected on other changes that need to happen. Then you test that plan out. You look at the results of your fidelity assessment or whatever you might be collecting at the time. And then you act on it. So the action could be that you need to tailor the program that you're delivering for the context. Or you might find that things are going fine, but usually in those first years, you would be finding that you'd want to make some type of tailoring or change to improve the situation for which the program is functioning within. So I might just skip, because we did a reflection, and we'll do one after the end of the next case study, because Karen Turner will be talking about the Triple P program and implementation of that. Oh, we got it. Thank you. Sorry.